Public embarrassment is rarely an accident. When someone chooses to expose a mistake, highlight a flaw, or deliver a sharp joke at your expense in front of an audience, they are almost never doing it for light-hearted fun. They are engaging in a calculated display of social leverage. The goal is simple: to lower your standing while instantly raising their own without having to earn it through merit. It is an attempt to force a public shift in power, using the eyes and ears of the room as an active amplifier. When an attack of this kind happens, the brain reacts in milliseconds. The sudden rush of heat to your face, the tight sensation in your chest, and the urge to either snap back with equal aggression or shrink away into silence are entirely natural. They are ancient survival responses. The human mind evaluates public exposure as a direct threat to safety, because historically, being singled out by the group meant dynamic isolation. But in modern social dynamics, whether in an office meeting, a family dinner, or a casual gathering among friends, that immediate physical reaction is precisely what the attacker is hoping to provoke. They want an emotional response, because an emotional response confirms that the blow landed. There is a fundamental psychological mechanism behind this behavior. People who rely on public embarrassment as a social tool are rarely acting from a position of true strength. True strength operates with quiet composure. It has no need to engineer public spectacles. Instead, those who weaponize exposure are usually managing an underlying sense of insecurity or perceived threat to their own status. By dragging someone else's perceived flaw into the open, they temporarily redirect the group's focus away from their own vulnerabilities. It creates a brief, artificial illusion of dominance. Nearly 5 centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a core trait of human behavior that explains why this tactic works so consistently in everyday life. He noted that most people judge far more by what they see with their eyes than by what they can verify through careful thought. In any group setting, observers naturally default to the most visible dynamic occurring in the moment. When someone delivers a sharp, calculated insult or calls attention to your error in public, the onlookers do not immediately pause to analyze the moral fairness of the attack. Their eyes simply record who appears composed and who appears rattled. If you become defensive, flustered, or angry, the crowd subconsciously accepts the attacker's premise, that you have been successfully diminished. Consider how this scenario unfolds in a standard workplace environment. During a group presentation, a team member suddenly interrupts to highlight a minor oversight in your numbers. They do not bring it up privately beforehand, nor do they wait for a one-on-one follow-up. Instead, they raise their voice slightly, turn toward the supervisor, and frame the error as a major failure of attention. The intent is not to fix the mistake. If fixing the mistake were the goal, a quiet side note would have achieved it far more effectively. The explicit goal of the public delivery is to reset the social hierarchy in the room. The speaker attempts to position themselves as the sharp, vigilant protector of quality while framing you as careless or incompetent. The trap in that moment is the instinct to offer a long, rapid explanation. When you immediately begin listing justifications, talking over them, or offering a detailed defense, you inadvertently confirm that their comment holds significant power over you. Lengthy explanations are almost always read by a group as a sign of distress. You are, in effect, negotiating for your own worth in real time while the attacker sits back and lets your anxiety do the work for them. The most effective initial countermeasure to public embarrassment is not a witty comeback, nor is it immediate confrontation. It is deliberate, controlled pause. When someone attempts to publicly disarm you, time feels like it accelerates. The instinct is to speak instantly to plug the awkward silence. But taking control of time is the first step toward taking control of the room. By deliberate design, allow 2 or 3 seconds of complete stillness before you respond. Look directly at the person who made the comment with a neutral, steady expression. Do not frown, do not smile, and do not break eye contact prematurely. That brief pause accomplishes 3 distinct psychological shifts. First, it breaks the momentum of the attack. The aggressor expects an instant, defensive reaction, and when they do not receive one, their dynamic footing shifts. Second, it shifts the focus of the room back onto the attacker. As the silence stretches for just a couple seconds, the audience stops evaluating your mistake and starts evaluating the awkwardness of the insult that was just thrown. Third, it allows your own nervous system to settle, moving your mind out of a reactive, threat-based posture and back into clear strategic thinking. Power in human dynamics rarely belongs to the person who speaks the loudest or strikes first. It belongs to the person who remains the least reactive to the environment around them. When you train yourself to sit comfortably in the momentary tension created by someone else's bad behavior, you strip the embarrassment of its intended effect. The attack relies entirely on your participation to work. If you refuse to accept the emotional framing handed to you, the embarrassment cannot attach itself to your identity. It simply remains hanging in the air, belonging entirely to the person who created it. When an attack fails to produce an immediate emotional reaction, the dynamic in the room begins to tilt. The person trying to embarrass you relies heavily on an unspoken rule of social pressure. They expect you to accept the frame they have built. If they frame you as incompetent, foolish, or out of place, they assume you will step right into that role by becoming defensive. To dismantle public embarrassment completely, you must learn to master the art of frame control. Frame control is not about arguing over the details of what was said. It is about quietly rejecting the underlying premise of the entire interaction. Consider a common social situation that happens outside of work. You are sitting around a table with a group of friends or family members, and someone suddenly decides to bring up an old, embarrassing story about a mistake you made years ago. They tell it with a slight grin, framing it as a funny memory, but the timing and tone make the true intention obvious. They are trying to lower your status in front of people who respect you. Most people respond to this in one of two ways. They either laugh nervously while feeling miserable inside, or they get visibly defensive and say, "Why do you always have to bring that up?" Both responses give the attacker exactly what they want. A nervous laugh shows you are uncomfortable but afraid to speak up. Getting defensive proves that the memory still holds emotional power over you. There is a third, far more effective approach: neutral exposure. Instead of fighting the story or laughing along to keep the peace, you treat the comment with flat, objective curiosity. You look at the person, acknowledge the fact without acknowledging the shame, and calmly move the conversation forward. You might simply say, "That was definitely a rough mistake at the time," in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, without adding any long explanations, excuses, or emotional weight. By refusing to hide from the detail while completely stripping away the emotional reaction, you do something remarkable. You render the weapon useless. Shame requires secrecy and emotional resistance to grow. When you treat the embarrassing detail as simple, uninteresting history, the attempt to mock you falls completely flat. The room sees someone who is entirely comfortable with their own past, and the person who tried to use it against you ends up looking small and vindictive. Centuries ago, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus offered an observation about human reactions that cuts straight to the heart of social conflict. He noted that people are not disturbed by things that happen to them, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning those things. When someone attempts to publicly embarrass you, their words carry zero inherent power to diminish your worth. The damage only occurs when you internally agree with their assessment and allow their opinion to define the moment. Understanding this truth changes how you process social tension. When someone throws a sharp jab at you in public, they are handing you an emotional package. You have the absolute right to refuse to accept it. You do not need to unpack it, analyze it, or react to it. You can simply let it sit on the table between you. Another powerful strategic response to public humiliation is the technique of calm clarification. This is particularly effective in formal or professional environments where direct confrontation might appear unprofessional. Imagine you are in a team meeting, presenting an idea you have worked on for weeks. Someone interrupts and says in a mocking tone, "Did you actually think that strategy would work, or did you just forget how our market functions?" The statement is designed to make you look foolish and unprepared. If you fire back with an insult, you lose the professional high ground. If you freeze, you look like you agree with them. Instead, you use calm clarification to turn the spotlight directly back onto their behavior. You maintain a relaxed posture, look them dead in the eye, and ask a clear, dispassionate question. Are you asking about the specific market data behind this, or are you just offering a personal opinion? Notice what happens in that moment. You have not raised your voice. You have not used an insult. You have simply forced them to explicitly state their intention in front of everyone. If they try to back down and say they were just joking, they look foolish. If they try to defend their harsh tone, they are forced to engage with your actual points rather than hiding behind a cheap shot. You have effectively made them explain their bad behavior to the entire room. People who use public embarrassment as a primary tactic rely on the victim's willingness to go along with the awkwardness silently. They operate best in the shadows of passive aggression. The second you shine a bright, calm light on what they are doing, their leverage vanishes. This strategy works because it exposes the underlying structure of social dominance. An attacker wants to create a scene where they act as the judge and you act as the accused. By asking a clear, direct question, you reverse those roles completely. You become the observer evaluating their conduct while they are forced to justify their words to the group. None of these strategies require you to be naturally aggressive, loud, or sharp-tongued. In fact, being loud often works against you. The most powerful presence in any room is almost always the person who needs the least amount of noise to make their point. When you realize that public embarrassment is just a clumsy attempt to borrow your energy, you stop handing it over. When public embarrassment is repeated over time, it ceases to be a series of isolated incidents. It becomes a subtle system of boundary testing. Aggressors rarely start with their most severe insults. They begin with small, boundary-probing jabs disguised as jokes, constructive feedback, or harmless teasing. They monitor your face, your posture, and your response to see how much social territory you are willing to surrender without a fight. If you consistently minimize these early slights, laughing off subtle disrespect or quietly lowering your head to avoid making a scene, you are unconsciously training the other person on how to treat you. You are signaling that your public standing can be bought cheaply. To break this pattern, you must understand the distinction between reacting and responding. Reacting is an automatic, defensive reflex driven by emotional distress. Responding is a conscious, strategic choice driven by personal standards. Reacting gives your power away. Responding establishes firm, unbreakable ground. Consider how this plays out in daily social or professional dynamics. Suppose a colleague or acquaintance regularly makes subtle, passive-aggressive comments about your background, your lifestyle, or your work style whenever a group gathers. The comments are just veiled enough that if you get upset, they can easily claim, "I was only joking, don't be so sensitive." This is a classic psychological maneuver known as gaslighting within social dominance. The goal is to inflict harm publicly while making you feel unreasonable for noticing it. The mistake most people make when facing this ongoing dynamic is waiting until they reach a breaking point. They swallow 5 or 6 small insults in silence, letting resentment build up inside, until the 7th insult causes them to explode with anger in front of everyone. When that explosion happens, the attacker wins completely. The onlookers forget the subtle disrespect that led up to the moment and only see your sudden emotional outburst. The attacker calmly plays the victim, and your standing in the room is damaged far more than theirs. To handle systematic embarrassment, you must replace emotional explosions with immediate, low-intensity boundary setting. The very first time someone crosses the line in public, address it with precision and total emotional detachment. You do not need to make a grand speech or raise your voice. In fact, lowering your volume often forces the rest of the room to quiet down to hear you, shifting the focus entirely to your words. Use what psychologists call the statement of reality approach. State exactly what was done, state its impact neutrally, and set a clear expectation. For instance, if someone uses a personal piece of information to make a joke at your expense during a group discussion, do not respond to the content of the joke. Instead, address the act itself. Bringing up my private conversation to make a point here isn't relevant, and it's not something I'm going to engage with. Say it with a flat, even tone. No anger, no sarcasm, no nervous smile. Then, without waiting for a long debate, immediately redirect the conversation back to the task at hand or to another person in the room. By doing this, you accomplish two critical things. First, you set a clear boundary in real time, showing everyone present that you notice disrespect and will not let it slide. Second, by moving on immediately, you demonstrate that the insult does not have enough weight to stall your momentum or disrupt your focus. Nearly a century ago, the pioneer of analytical psychology, Carl Jung, noted that the human psyche constantly seeks to project its own unacknowledged flaws onto others. When people harbor deep insecurities about their own competence, worth, or status, they frequently externalize those fears by attempting to highlight those exact flaws in the people around them. When you understand this psychological projection, public embarrassment loses its sharpest edge. You begin to see that the person mocking your work, your appearance, or your choices is rarely talking about you at all. They are exposing their own internal friction. They are broadcasting what they fear most about themselves. When you see public embarrassment through this lens, your entire posture changes. You no longer take the attack personally, because you realize you are simply a convenient screen upon which they are projecting their own insecurities. This realization creates a profound sense of internal immunity. You can sit calmly in a room while someone tries to tear you down, not because you are suppressing your pain, but because you clearly see the weakness driving their behavior. This shift in perspective is what transforms true confidence into a permanent trait rather than a temporary performance. Quiet authority does not come from winning every verbal argument or having the fastest comebacks. It comes from reaching a state of self-assurance where other people's attempts to diminish you simply bounce off without leaving a mark. When an attacker realizes that their public jabs no longer provoke fear, anger, or defensiveness, the dynamic collapses completely. A tool that fails to produce results is eventually abandoned. By mastering your internal response, controlling the frame of the conversation, and setting calm, immediate boundaries, you don't just protect yourself from public embarrassment. You turn every attempt to weaken you into a clear demonstration of your quiet strength. Once you break the immediate cycle of public embarrassment, a deeper question remains. How do you build a presence that deters people from targeting you in the first place? Prevention is always more powerful than repair. While you cannot control what another person thinks or plans to say, you have complete authority over the posture, energy, and boundaries you bring into every room. People who use humiliation as a social shortcut look for specific entry points. They hunt for subtle signs of hesitation, over-explaining simple choices, seeking constant approval before taking a stand, or trying hard to fit in at any personal cost. When an aggressor senses that your self-worth depends on the room's approval, they know a public jab will rattle you. Building long-term immunity against public embarrassment starts with removing your need for public approval. Consider how this plays out in social and professional environments. Two people can deliver the exact same mistake in front of a crowd, yet experience completely different outcomes based entirely on how they carry themselves afterward. The first person makes an error during a speech, notices the room's reaction, and immediately begins to shrink. They apologize repeatedly, make self-deprecating jokes to soften the blow, and look around nervously to see if people are still judging them. By doing this, they invite the room to treat the mistake as a major flaw. They hand the audience permission to look down on them. The second person makes the same error, pauses for a second, corrects the detail neutrally, and continues speaking without missing a beat. They treat the mistake as a minor piece of data rather than a reflection of their character. Because they refuse to attach shame to the moment, the audience forgets the error within seconds. The difference isn't the mistake itself. It is the internal relationship each person has with their own imperfection. When you accept that making mistakes, having flaws, and missing details are normal parts of being human, no one can weaponize those things against you. You take away their ammunition by owning your reality first. Centuries before modern psychology, the Stoic philosopher Seneca observed that a person is as wretched as they have convinced themselves they are. He recognized that much of our psychological suffering comes not from external events, but from the exaggerated meaning we assign to them in our own minds. When someone tries to embarrass you in public, they are betting that your internal narrative will join forces with their insult. If you agree with their assessment, even silently, you complete the attack for them. But if your internal foundation is solid, their words remain nothing more than empty noise. Developing this level of internal strength requires practicing what can be called strategic self-possession. This means keeping a clear separation between who you are and how other people react to you in any given moment. Take a simple everyday example. Imagine you walk into a social gathering wearing an outfit that stands out, and someone makes a loud, backhanded comment about your appearance in front of a group. "That's certainly a bold choice for tonight," they say with a quiet smirk. If you lack self-possession, your mind immediately goes into hyperdrive. You worry about what everyone else thinks, you feel a flush of shame, and you wonder if you should go change or offer an awkward explanation for why you chose those clothes. If you have developed self-possession, you look at them with mild interest and say, "I like it," before turning to talk to someone else. You don't debate the topic. You don't ask for their validation. You state your reality simply and let their opinions sit there, completely unvalidated. You show the entire room that your choices are not up for public vote. When you consistently demonstrate that your sense of self cannot be shaken by cheap shots, something remarkable happens to the dynamic around you. People stop trying to embarrass you, not because they have suddenly become better human beings, but because they realize that attacking you yields zero social return. Aggressors want a show. When they realize that targeting you produces only calm composure and clear exposure of their own bad behavior, they quietly move on to easier targets. True authority is never loud, aggressive, or eager to prove itself. It is grounded, observant, and untamed by the casual opinions of others. When you walk into any room knowing your worth is not subject to public debate, you become completely untouched by the psychological games people play. You stop worrying about how to survive public embarrassment, because you have learned to carry a quiet strength that renders it completely powerless.